No one could handle the billionaire's twin daughters. Not the nannies, not the tutors, not even the most expensive experts in the city. They destroyed every rule, every home, and every heart that tried to reach them. Until one day, a single dad janitor man with nothing but love in his heart and scars in his past walked into their mansion. He wasn't rich, he wasn't special, but he carried something money could never buy. Patience, kindness, and pain turned into wisdom. Everyone laughed when he said he could handle them, but no one laughed when they saw what happened. Next, when the man who cleaned floors ended up cleaning the dust off 3 broken hearts. This is the story of how one simple man did the impossible and proved that love, not luxury, can heal even the richest souls. No one dared to enter the Anderson mansion anymore. Not after what happened to the last nanny. She had run out screaming at midnight, covered in flour, crying and swearing she'd never take care of kids again. And those kids were only 10 years old. The Anderson twins, Lily and Lucy, were the daughters of one of the richest men in the city, billionaire Richard Anderson. But despite his billions, there was one thing Richard couldn't buy: peace inside his own home. He built skyscrapers, owned luxury hotels, and closed million-dollar deals before breakfast. But when he came home to his daughters, he faced a battle no amount of money could win. The twins were beautiful, brilliant, and impossible. No nanny lasted more than a week. Some quit after just one day. They were clever enough to outsmart adults, mischievous enough to turn the mansion upside down, and wild enough to make any caretaker cry. Richard tried everything, hiring the best child psychologists, elite tutors, even former military nannies. But every single one failed. The girls played tricks, hid their shoes, locked people in rooms, and even poured syrup into a tutor's handbag. "They don't listen to anyone," Richard shouted one evening, throwing down another resignation letter. "Not a single person can control them." The mansion's staff whispered stories about the twins like legend show they once set the fire alarm just to escape bedtime, or how they hacked their father's tablet to order 50 boxes of chocolate online. But beneath the chaos, no one saw the truth. 2 little girls who were not truly bad, just broken. They had lost their mother 2 years ago in a tragic accident, and since then, laughter had turned into screams, and silence had become their only language. Richard didn't see it. He was too busy running from his own pain, hiding behind business meetings and endless work, until one night, when he sighed in defeat and told his assistant, "Find anyone, I don't care who, just someone who can make them listen." And that's when destiny decided to step in the most unexpected way. Not in a suit, not with a degree, but in a janitor's uniform, when Daniel Cole first stepped into the towering Anderson Corporation building every morning. No one noticed him. He wasn't wearing a suit, didn't carry a briefcase, and didn't drive a luxury car. He was just the janitor, the man who mopped the marble floors while others hurried to meetings. But behind his quiet eyes was a story no one knew. Daniel wasn't just cleaning floors. He was cleaning up the pieces of his life. A few years earlier, he'd lost his wife in a tragic accident, leaving him alone to raise his little daughter, Emma, who was only 6 at the time. Every morning before dawn, he made her breakfast, walked her to school, then rushed to his job at the Anderson building, all to keep their small apartment and her dreams alive. He didn't have wealth, but he had something stronger: patience, love, and resilience. One evening, while polishing the glass doors outside Richard Anderson's office, Daniel overheard voices raised in frustration. "I've tried every expert," Richard shouted. "Every professional quits. My daughters are uncontrollable." Daniel hesitated, holding his mop still. His heart softened. He knew that tone, the helplessness of a parent who loves his children but doesn't know how to reach them. He took a small breath and said quietly, "Maybe they don't need an expert, sir. Maybe they just need someone who listens." Richard looked up, startled. A billionaire and a janitor stood face to face, worlds apart, yet both fathers. "You think you can handle them?" Richard asked, half amused, half curious. Daniel gave a small smile. "Sir, I've handled spills, storms, and a 6-year-old with crayons on the walls. I think I can try." There was something in his voice, calm, humble, but steady, that Richard hadn't heard in anyone else. It wasn't confidence. It was compassion. That night, against all logic and laughter from his staff, Richard made a decision no one expected. He hired Daniel the janitor to take care of his daughters. Everyone thought it was a mistake, but Daniel wasn't. Walking into a job, he was walking into a mission one that would test every ounce of love, patience, and courage he had left. The next morning, Daniel stood before the massive iron gates of the Anderson mansion. For a moment, he almost turned back. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a fortress, tall, silent, and cold. As he walked through the hallway, every servant's eyes followed him. Some whispered, some laughed quietly. "A janitor? He won't last a day." But Daniel just smiled softly and whispered to himself, "I'm not here to last. I'm here to try." When he finally entered the twins' playroom, chaos greeted him like a storm. Toys were scattered everywhere. Crayons were scribbled on the walls. A giant teddy bear hung from the chandelier like it had survived a war. And there they were, Lily and Lucy Anderson, sitting on the carpet, faces filled with mischief and challenge. One twin crossed her arms. The other squinted at him. Another nanny, Lily said. "He looks like a cleaner," Lucy added with a smirk. Daniel chuckled. "That's because I am a cleaner, but today I'm also your friend." The girls exchanged a look, one that said, "We've seen this before." Within 10 minutes, they tested him. They hid his shoes, threw water on his mop, and even locked him out of the room. Most people would have shouted or stormed out, but Daniel just knocked on the door gently and said, "Take your time. I'll be right here when you're ready." He sat in the hallway for hours. No yelling, no anger, just quiet patience. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't to mock him. It was because Lily peeked out, confused. "You're still here?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "I told you I don't leave when things get messy. That's when I stay." That night, something shifted. The twins didn't suddenly become angels. But for the first time, they didn't slam the door. They watched him as he cleaned, listened to him hum a lullaby, and whispered to each other, "He's different." For years, people had tried to control them. Daniel did something no one else had. He understood them, and though he didn't know it yet, that tiny spark of trust was about to change all of their lives forever. Weeks passed, and something incredible began to happen inside the Anderson mansion. The once chaotic halls that echoed with screams were now filled with laughter, piano tunes, and the soft sound of stories being read at bedtime. The staff couldn't believe it. The twins, the girls who had driven out 20 caretakers, were now calmer, kinder, and even helping Daniel clean up after playtime. Daniel didn't perform miracles. He just showed up every single day. He didn't shout when they misbehaved. He listened. He didn't punish their tantrums. He asked why they were upset, and little by little, their walls began to fall. One evening, Richard returned home early from a business trip. As he stepped into the living room, he froze. Lily was asleep on the couch, her head resting on Daniel's arm, while Lucy giggled softly as he read her a bedtime story. It was the first time in 2 years Richard had seen his daughters smile like that. After the girls fell asleep, he pulled Daniel aside. "How did you do it?" Richard asked quietly. "They never listened to me. Never to anyone." Daniel looked at him with kind eyes. They don't need to be controlled, sir. They just needed to be heard. Richard frowned. Heard? I've given them everything, toys, tutors, vacations. Daniel interrupted gently. But not you. They didn't want a nanny. They wanted their father back. Those words hit Richard harder than any business failure ever could. He looked down, realizing the truth he'd ignored for too long. Since his wife's death, he'd drowned himself in work, trying to protect himself from pain. But in doing so, he'd left his daughters fighting their grief alone. Tears filled his eyes as Daniel continued softly. They weren't angry, Mr. Anderson. They were just missing her and missing you. That night, Richard didn't return to his office. He stayed home, sat beside his daughters' beds, and watched them sleep. For the first time, he didn't see difficult twins. He saw two little hearts that had just been waiting to be loved again. Months passed, and the Anderson mansion was no longer the cold, silent place it used to be. The halls that once echoed with arguments now rang with laughter, piano melodies, and the sound of little feet running joyfully down the stairs. The twins had changed not because someone controlled them, but because someone finally understood them. They helped Daniel cook breakfast, played with Emma whenever she visited, and even made small thank you cards for the house staff. And Richard, he had changed too. He no longer left early for the office or stayed buried in meetings. Every evening, he came home on time not for business calls, but for bedtime stories. He'd sit beside Daniel and the girls, listening to their laughter as if trying to memorize every sound. One sunny afternoon, the mansion was filled with guests for the twins' 11th birthday. Balloons floated, music played softly, and smiles were everywhere. In the center of it all, Lily and Lucy stood holding a handmade card wrapped in ribbons. They ran to Daniel and said, "This is for you, Mr. Daniel, because you're not just our caretaker. You're our hero." Inside the card, written in their uneven handwriting, were the words, "You fixed what money couldn't. You fixed our hearts." For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. His eyes filled with tears. He'd lost so much in life, but here, in this grand mansion, he'd found something priceless, a family that needed him as much as he needed them. Richard walked over, emotion in his voice as he raised a glass. To Daniel, the man who did what no one else could. You didn't just take care of my daughters. You taught me how to be a father again. Everyone clapped, and for the first time Daniel smiled not as a janitor, but as a man who had truly made a difference. That night, as the stars glowed above the mansion, Daniel whispered to Emma, "You see, sweetheart, love isn't about how much you have. It's about how much you give." And from that day forward, the Anderson mansion wasn't remembered as the home of a billionaire, but as the home where a single dad's heart healed a broken family.